Hello, everyone. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about sharing the wound. What does that mean? It probably sounds a little weird, right? But we'll be getting to that. And we aren't going to be reading from the Bible at all today. This lesson was inspired from an interview I heard on the OnBeing podcast. And I'm going to tell you a story that was told by Ariel Burger. And he was the one that was interviewed in this podcast and where I heard one from whom I heard this story. He's an author and he's a rabbi and he's an artist and he teaches as well. And the story, it's actually sort of a story within a story because it's really a story that his son told him. Because his son went on a trip, a semester-long trip, to Israel when he was in school, and they traveled to Poland while they were there. And he made a good friend on this trip called Mason. And when the group got to Poland, they were touring some of the centers of Jewish life before the war and going to some of the former sites of the former concentration camps. A couple days into this time in Poland, Mason disappeared for the day with one of the counselors on the program. Didn't say where he was going. Well, he did tell Ariel's son, who's the subject of the story, eventually about where he had gone that day. And this is the story that Mason told. My grandparents were survivors. They were married for 3 weeks before they were deported to Auschwitz. When they got to Auschwitz, they were, of course, separated, obviously, and his grandfather would go every evening to the fence that separated the men's and the women's side of the camp to bring her a crust of bread or an extra potato, if he could, or just to see her. So they'd meet at this fence, and the grandfather would bring the grandmother some bread. Until my grandmother, he said, was transferred to a rabbit farm on the outskirts of Auschwitz. At this rabbit farm, the Nazis were doing experiments on the rabbits that had something to do with finding a cure for typhus. The rabbit farm was run by a Polish man, and this Polish man noticed pretty early on that the rabbits were actually getting better quality food and more food and attention and care than the Jewish slave laborers were getting. So the Polish man started to sneak food in to the Jewish slave laborers and the inmates at this rabbit farm. Well, the grandmother cut her, not grandmother at the time, of course, but Mason's grandmother cut her arm on a piece of barbed wire while she was there, and the cut became infected. Now, if she was in normal circumstances, she would have been fine because we have antibiotics, right? It wasn't a very serious infection, so you take a couple of antibiotics and it would fix it. But she was a Jewish slave laborer at this rabbit farm. So, of course, there was no way that she was going to be given antibiotics. She wasn't even getting enough food barely to live on. So, what did that Polish man who was running the rabbit farm do? He cut his own arm open and he placed his wound on her arm, so that he would get the infection, and the infection would be in his blood as well. And sure enough, he became infected. So he then went to the Nazis and he said, "I'm one of your best managers. This rabbit farm is very productive. If I die, you're going to lose lots of productivity and your rabbit farm won't be able to survive. I need antibiotics to be able to survive and to run your rabbit farm." And sure enough, they gave him the medicine. And of course, the Polish man then shared it with Mason's grandmother, and it saved her life. She would have died otherwise. So when Mason was telling this story to his friend, he said, "Where I was when I left the other day and disappeared, I went to see that Polish man that was running the rabbit farm many, many years ago. He was still alive, and he was living on the outskirts of Warsaw. And Mason went to him to say, 'Thank you for my life.'" So that is the story. I found it very moving. And Ariel Burger, the one who was interviewed, who related the story in the podcast, had some interesting things to say about it. So he said lots of things. But this is one paragraph that really stood out to me. He said, "What does it take to be the kind of person who will share someone else's wound in spite of all the pressure to see them as less valuable than a rabbit? What does it take to push against all that pressure and do the right thing with courage and moral clarity, to see another person as a person when everything else around you is telling you not to?" So let's take a closer look at this. What he's saying. So here was this Polish man who he was being told that these Jewish slave laborers were scum and deserved nothing, and to go to infect, first of all, to infect himself with this infection, not knowing if you could get the antibiotics, that was a big risk in itself. But to go to then the Nazis and say, "I need these antibiotics," that was a risk too, because so it says, push against all the pressure with to see another person as a person, right? Because the Nazis didn't see the Jewish slave laborers, the Jewish at all, as people, and he did. So he had to go to them in despite of what the Nazis thought, and with his own beliefs, and stand up for those beliefs. And he knew it was the right thing to do, right? It took a lot of courage to be able to do that, but he had that courage to do the right thing. So yeah, so what is it? Boy, that takes a lot. Well, it takes courage. It takes, as it says in this quote, moral clarity. But how can you be that kind of person? Let me read it again. What does it take to be the kind of person who will share someone else's wound in spite of all the pressure to see them as less valuable than a rabbit? What does it take to push against all that pressure and do the right thing with courage and moral clarity, and to see another person as a person when everything around you is telling you not to? So that whole story I thought was wonderful, and that paragraph, those words were really spoke to me, what he described there. But what popped out to me the most, and what spoke to me the most in that paragraph, was the concept of sharing the wound. In the story, the Polish man literally shared an actual physical wound of the skin. But there's other wounds that people can have as well that are not physical and are often invisible, and they don't show up on the outside to anyone else. So those would be wounds to someone's emotions or wounds to their soul. For example, someone might be struggling to deal with an illness that no one knows they have. It could be a physical illness, it could be a mental illness. Someone might be missing a loved one that's died. Think about kids who have difficult situations at home with parents who don't take care of them, or unable to take care of them, or just don't care to. Or maybe just someone who is really scared about something that they have to do, or some unknown situation that they're approaching, and it's making them very fearful. So there's lots of ways that people can be living with emotional wounds and struggling to deal with them. But what we can do is follow the lead of that Polish man that was running the rabbit farm in the story, and share these wounds of others, which can help their wounds heal, just as the Polish man shared the cut in the arm of the woman so she could get the drugs she needed to heal her infection. But how do we do that, right? Okay, easier said than done. Because you can never entirely understand what someone else might be going through, because you aren't in their shoes, you aren't in their body, you don't, we're all unique and have unique experiences, right? So you can't know exactly what they're going through. But what you can understand, that what they're going through is very difficult for them. And you've had things that you've had to go through that are difficult yourself, so you can understand these difficulties that they face in that way. And sharing the wound doesn't mean fixing it for them. It doesn't mean sewing back up that cut. It's more about giving that wound the space to heal. So with continuing that analogy, saying, letting the wound breathe, leaving it open to the air so it can heal. So it's not saying, oh, if someone's struggling with something, well, you should do this or you should do that, and then you'll be all better. It's more about just being there for the person, with them and for them. It's about seeing what they're going through, and more importantly, letting them know that you see what they're going through, right? So it's saying to them, I see you. I see your wounds. That's it. I am here. So sharing the wound is seeing a person for their true selves and seeing that hurt that they're going through, the troubles that they're dealing with, and just being there emotionally to share their troubles and ease their burden. So for this week, your assignment is to think about if there's someone in your life who is wounded on the inside in some way. And if so, then find some way in your own way to share the wound, to tell them, I see you, I'm here. So until next time, be kind, share someone's wound, and have a great week.